Well, hello, folks. Welcome to this week's episode of Recruiting Live. I have a lot more energy than I did last week. I am your host, Katrina Kibben, and my lovely guest this week is Mary Faulkner. But before we introduce Mary and tell you all about her world of recruiting, I just want to give anyone who's new to Recruiting Live a little down low of how this thing works. The first thing you'll want to do is make sure that you're tweeting. So you can use hashtag #RLive, and I will give kudos to Animal. Can't believe I'm going to say this. Animal was right. So we just shortened the hashtag. Make sure you tweet along so other people can join, because Recruiting Live is not your typical webinar. So we're not going to share slides. We didn't decide what you're supposed to learn. We have created this model where people can come in and ask questions of experts who are actually recruiting to learn more about how it works and to get your questions answered. That's the whole point. I can't decide what you need to know. You know what you need to know. So I just bring the smart people here. And today's really smart, sassy, awesome person is Mary Faulkner. Mary, thank you so much for being here.
I love it. Love being here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so why don't you tell people where you work, a little bit about your recruiting world.
Yeah, so I work at Denver Water, which is a public sector utility. So we are sort of like government, but not entirely like government. We don't take taxpayer money. We're 100% funded by our customers. So it's really important that we're careful with their money and that we're spending it wisely. And we are regulated, though, like a civil service public sector organization. So when it comes to recruiting and everything like that, we have to make sure that we are very much following our process. We have an open competitive bid. The only thing that we don't do is the civil service testing. But everything else, we have to make sure that people are minimally qualified, we follow the right process, everybody is considered, blah, 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 blah. So it's different than private sector, which is part of the reason why I'm here today.
Exactly.
But we have a little bit more flexibility than some of the other public sector, highly regulated industries that are out there. So it's kind of nice. It's like we can still have personality, but we just have to make sure that we're doing it by the book.
Exactly, exactly. And, we were talking a little bit before we got started that a lot of people come to me and say, that advice was great, but I work in a highly regulated industry, and that's why I'm so thankful that you are giving us your time today. What do you think are some of the key areas that people forget about when they're talking to I'm going to call it a regulated recruiter, but you guys know, just a recruiter in a regulated industry?
I think for us, it's not so much on the recruiter side. My recruiters understand what it is, and it's more from the candidate and the application side. So there are certain things that we can and can't do. We are shifting. You'll see a shift more for recruiters in highly regulated to be less of an administrative transactional function and more kind of that traditional build the relationships, build the pipeline. But things like building communities in the pipeline, we cannot accept a resume if we don't have an open position. So that's hard for us because we have people who are being told, send them your resume, get the foot in the door, and we're like, thanks, but we can't accept it. So just keep an eye out on positions that are going to be open. So we're exploring opportunities to create communities without actually accepting a resume. The other thing that people tend to forget is, when you're on a job hunt chat or other recruiting chats that are out there and looking for jobs, you'll always hear recruiters tell potential candidates, just apply. You don't know. You never know. Even if you're only 60% there, just apply. And yeah, maybe for a lot of positions in the private sector, but public sector, those minimum qualifications are minimum qualifications. We will cut you. So yeah. You have to make sure that you actually qualify. And it's frustrating for us because it kind of gums up the application process, and we have to make sure that we're scanning for all those qualifications. And if you just keep applying, you kind of get a reputation for yourself, and we want to make sure that people understand, put your best foot forward, apply for the jobs that you're qualified for.
Of course, totally. So I'm curious, obviously a lot of people talk about pipeline, and you mentioned kind of building your own communities. How do you go about doing that when you can't remarket to applicants, or can you? How do you build a community when you're regulated?
So some of the things that we try to make sure that we do is we do keep what we call an eligibility list. So, and a lot of public sector does this. So be aware of that and ask if they do. So if you go through the process, you find out you're qualified, you interview, that sort of thing, we can keep you on the eligibility list. So if the same job or type of job opens later, we can contact you and say, hey, are you still interested? We don't have to go through the interview process again. But we really focus on relationship building with our different communities. So we have we're in the process of building a really strong veteran relationship with different groups. We used to go to all the VA clubs locally. Those stopped for a little bit, so now we're working on doing a coalition of our own with the VA to make sure we have that. We build an intern program. We have an official intern program now. So even though we can't be like a traditional kind of intern program where we say we want to hire 50% of our interns every year, we have to hire what we have an opening for. We get in there. We're building relationships with the schools. We're building relationships with the programs. And we do hire former interns quite a bit, actually. Even though the intern program, we're entering our 3rd year now, we've hired probably 4 or 5 of the interns that worked with us in the past. And we're unique in that we accept interns in all class levels. We're like, hey, you're a freshman, come on in. We want you to learn about the Denver water way of doing things. So we try to find ways to still build those relationships. The hardest thing, though, is to keep that ongoing conversation happening with people who are in our system. Part of it is because our ATS is a little sketchy, so we're working on that. But right. The technology sometimes gets in the way, but sometimes it is just figuring out how can we really put ourselves out there, go to job fairs, build those relationships. In some jobs, it's not hard because, and for those of you who are out there who are in specific kind of niche industries, if you want to do water treatment in Colorado, you have very few options, and we're the biggest one, right? So we have cool jobs, so come do cool jobs with us. But if you're in like IT or finance or HR, you have a lot of different options. So it's about explaining, how does it work in the public sector? What are the pros and cons? And have you ever thought about doing this? We have some great opportunities from the standpoint that we're pretty stable. Denver water is not going anywhere, so it's not like we're not going to fold. So we have that going for us, but also to kind of get past the stigma that can happen with public sector of explaining to people it's pretty much the same thing. There are some rules that you have to follow. Some of them might seem crazy if you're coming from a private sector, but really kind of explaining the possibilities and not being scared because they think it's, quote, government.
Yeah. So I think where a lot of people struggle with community building is on content, right? What do I say? What do I share with people that makes this worthwhile for them? Because it has to be something that is worthwhile, noticeable, and adds value to their life. Is there a limit on what you can share? Like, are you doing job seeker info or?
So what we can share is it a little bit. So it's interesting because we're not fully government, we're not fully private sector. There are certain things that don't apply to us. So we take the stance of, if we don't have to ask certain questions, we don't. If we don't have to share certain information, we don't. For some municipalities, you'll see they share everything. They put out all their job descriptions, all their salary. We don't.
Press releases.
Right. So what we tend to share, so our Denver Water media team does a really good job of, we have a new thing called TAP, so go on TAP. I don't remember the website, but go to denverwater.org and
little water joke.
Right. You're on TAP, right? But it's cool because they used to have, don't laugh, we used to have just what we called our Mile High blog, and they were using that to reach out to the community, and then we in talent would tie into that. We're doing that with TAP now, so it's a lot more, kind of that content marketing approach of getting different videos and getting customer input and getting using different ways to communicate with our customers, and we tie into that a lot of times from the recruiting side of things. We might share interesting stories. One of the things that's really unique about Colorado is we're one of 2 headwater states, meaning nothing actually comes into our state. So things like the snowpack are really important to people. So you'll see a lot of stories about snowpack. We're insane right now. We're like at 150+% of snowpack for this time because we've had so much snow. We communicate that, and we talk about conservationism, and we talk about that. So we can use that to kind of tap into the mission side of recruiting for our group, because one of the things that we've learned when we've worked with different groups and kind of did some branding discussions from our employer side is people really are tied into our mission. So we can use that, especially with the veterans community. You know, you have transitioning veterans who are used to working for a mission, who like a mission-driven organization. We can say that's us. Our mission is to provide great tasting water safely at a good price to all of our customers, and we want to be the best ones who do it in the nation. And so we can tie into that mission. Our people really believe that the work that they're doing is really important work. There would be no Denver without Denver water, and it's been here for 100 years. So we can really tap into that from a communication side of things. We don't do a lot of revenue sharing, or we don't do that business side of things that often, because while it's important for how we function, it doesn't really matter from a competition standpoint.
Exactly. I love that you mentioned competition, because I think people forget about that element, that when you create your community, it's really, maybe it's not all about you, right? It's like, how do you take in the world? Who are your common competitors? Like, how can I use that information to benefit my team? It's good research. So we just got our first question from Derek Zeller. Thanks for being here, Mr. Zeller. He said, are you beholden to OFCCP rules in hiring?
We are not. So we're not a federal contractor. And so as such, we don't have to do that kind of reporting. So as part of kind of getting back to my point of, we don't ask a lot of those kind of typical EEOC type of questions because we're concerned about bias. So we want to make sure that when our hiring managers see what they're seeing, they're not getting some of that demographic information. I personally would love it, and I'm working with my legal team to try to make sure we can get some of that, because one of the things that we're really focused on as well, though, is diversity. We want to make sure that we're having a good applicant flow, and that we're not just hiring ourselves over and over. So we keep an eye on those things. We do still file our EEO reports when we're supposed to do it, but we don't have like the affirmative action planning or anything like that that we have to worry about.
Got it. Always Derek with the federal questions. That's his gig.
No, fair enough.
I was going to say, in fairness, I send all of my federal job seekers to him too, so appreciate you, Derek. Question from Jess Roberts. Jess, you were actually the person who came to mind too, because he works in gaming.
Oh, yeah.
And that's a pretty small, my understanding, it's a pretty small field as far as actual competitors for that talent. And so he says, what's the hardest thing to explain to candidates about being private versus federal? Or does that even come up in the candidate conversation?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. For a lot of the roles, not so much. So for like our engineers and our planning and all that sort of thing, they kind of know what they're getting into. They're targeting us. For example, for me, it's really understanding, some of it's the pacing. It can move at government pace. Some of it is, if you're going to be and as a manager, and we really try to explain this to managers too, civil service employees have a lot of protections that the private sector don't have. So you are protected by the Bill of Rights. You have a right to appeal any decision that impacts what your, quote, property. So your job is considered your property. So if you get fired for performance, you have a right to appeal. And there's a hearing and all that kind of stuff. So that type of stuff is probably bonkers, like that whole right to work thing. That's new for people. That's really hard to explain. Yes, Colorado is a right to work state, but guess what? So the best way that I explain it to people who don't have a lot of experience with the public sector side is to think it's close to like a union environment. It's not a union environment. We don't have tenure-based decisions or anything like that, and there's no shop stewards and all that sort of thing, but whatever preconceptions you might have about unions, it's a similar type of structure. It's not 100% the same, but it's probably the closest analogy that I can make for people who don't really know what they're getting into, and I'll count myself in that group. When I joined, I was like, oh, that's kind of crazy. We've actually, because of that and some of the experience that we've had, we've added that as a question of, what are your thoughts about coming into a public sector? What do you know about public sector? Especially if they don't have any experience in it, because we want to give them that opportunity to really understand what they're walking into.
Yeah. So how much flexibility do you have as far as like building the application? So you said, oh, I added the question.
Yeah, we can, well, we do that not in the application, we do that in the interview process.
Okay, got it.
But for the application, we actually do have more flexibility than you might think. The application itself, we do the bare bones. We want to make sure it's a legal document. So
Right.
sorry for all those who think I should just be able to send my resume. We still need a legal document.
5-minute apply.
I know. I hear you, and I want a parsing opportunity. I want something that will parse your resume so that you're not typing what you already have in. But we have a very short application. It's the bare bones. And so that actually comes across well in our surveys when we do it. But we also, a lot of jobs, we will add screening questions. So if we know that it's going to be a very niche, we need a very specific capability. We used to do the rate yourself on the competencies, but miraculously, everybody was really good when they were self-rated. So I know, I'm a 5. So we started doing more kind of screening questions of, give me an example, sort of that, what might have been a phone screen, we can do it in the application itself, and we have flexibility there. So that helps a lot.
Yeah. I'm just laughing because I can just picture it like, yeah, I'm awesome. Good.
I know. When I first started and I looked at it, I'm just like, so has anybody ever called themselves like a 2? Like, not really.
Like, yeah, you're like, can we do just an average of what everyone has given us and see if it's anything lower, like even a 4.99?
Right.
Apparently, honesty is not the best policy. So I have a question, but a ton more questions came in as you were explaining that. So I'm going to give their questions since, they are the bosses here, not me.
You're a giver.
Mark Fogel, I try. I really try. Mark Fogel, thank you for being here, Mark. He said, how do you deal with drug testing, giving the legalized marijuana in Colorado? Is that something you even do? I had that question too. Great question.
Yeah, and probably because I do different conferences around the country, that's the #1 question people ask me when they find out I'm from Colorado.
Yeah.
So I can speak from our perspective. So we're remarkably liberal in some ways at Denver Water. We're just like, whatever you do at home is your thing, but we do have positions that we consider safety sensitive. So if you're going to be driving our vehicles or you're going to be handling anything that has to do with our system, so you're laying pipe, treating water, anything like that that we consider safety sensitive, we drug test. And we're very clear about it. We say, here are the exact drugs that we test for. I'm tempted to even put in there, they stay in your system for at least 30 days because we have run into issues, and as companies across Colorado who do drug tests, we're losing candidates because of marijuana testing. So we try to keep it as open as possible. We really limit it to the jobs that safety is paramount. But we don't drug test every group. We don't drug test after every accident necessarily. We have some parameters around that as well. We do have random testing. We have CDL licenses, and we follow all those requirements. But it was, when I was in private sector and I was working there when medical marijuana became legalized. We had a huge discussion about that. What are we going to do?
Right.
And we chose because we were testing everybody. It was just a thing that we did. We decided to follow federal guidelines because we had facilities across the United States. And we're like, we'll just follow federal. So that was an easy piece of it. But for us, we're like, there's lots of case law out there that it's going to tell you what they do at home, as long as it doesn't impact what they're doing on their job, we can't really touch. So we treat it very similar to alcohol. Reasonable suspicion checklist, but if you are in a safety position, you get on the randomized drug test list.
That makes sense. Totally. A question, and I'm not going to say her name just in case this is a leading question. She said, what suggestions would you give a technical sourcer who's never worked in public sector but wants to move into it?
Oh, okay. So technical recruiting in the public sector is really pretty much the same. It's a little bit more challenging just because you're not competing with the same salary ranges typically. I mean, we pay market. We do, our Total Rewards team, shout out, does a great job of keeping up on market and making sure that we're matching what's out there. But the reality is you're going to be competing with companies that'll just throw money at anybody. So that's probably the hardest part of it. The other piece is in technical recruiting, you do build those relationships, you have the pipeline. You're typically like, I know this perfect person, I'm just going to place them in there. You don't get to do that in public sector. So you need to make sure that you understand what the policies and the processes for the public sector group that you're going to be working with. If you are trying to become an outside resource for a public sector organization, so like be a vendor, RFPs, that's the reality of the world. So we have a lot of technical recruiting groups that try to reach out to us and say like, hey, work with us, we'll help you do that. And we're like, yeah, we already did an RFP for that and we're on a 3-year contract now, so thanks. So really understand the procurement process of whatever public sector organization you're trying to get with. It's going to be listed on the website. We have a whole section called Working with Denver Water, and it tells you what that process is. We're allowed to take people to say, hey, this person would love to work with us in the future, and we put you on a vendor list, so when an RFP comes out, you're notified. But beyond that, there's not much. You really have to be aware of kind of what the process is. And be aware, too, like, God, I love you vendors, but just randomly emailing me and trying to make me feel guilty that I haven't gotten back to you. If I didn't get back to you, there was a reason. And know your audience. We have an RFP. And I'm sorry if this was you, I have smacked down a couple of vendors who try to do a cold call and try to do the like, look, I'm cute and different. And it's just like, you don't know your audience. You don't understand how we work. So, and it's clear from the email that you sent me, you don't understand how we work. So I'm much more open to people who reach out and say, I understand that you're public sector and you've probably had an RFP and I would love to be on your preferred vendor list. Can you tell me how to do that? That's a much better opening, but don't send me those emails, people. That's a much better.
Audra actually just said, yes, I am so fed up with the 4th email from a vendor that starts, in case you missed my last 3. I'm like, oh, I can't miss them. Why are you still emailing me?
I know. I have no guilt. I'm sorry. No guilt.
Yeah. Truth. So I'm curious. It's like a 2-part. So
did you take notes?
I'm totally taking notes. Look. I do take notes. You know, this is completely unscripted, and we do 0 prep for Recruiting Live. But I try to like think up a few things, and I get curious, and so I have to write down my questions so I don't forget. Anyway, so I think the candidate. Well, first question: are there a lot of technical sourcing teams on regulated companies? Like, do you have a sourcing team? Like a just sourcing?
No.
Okay.
No, we don't. I have 3 recruiters and a coordinator who work with me. And we are the full life cycle. It's from start to finish.
I feel like in a lot of regulated companies, they don't have or at least like utilities or civilian roles. I've never heard like a government contractor. Maybe I'm wrong actually, because Lockheed has a huge sourcing.
Yeah, they do. And it's going to depend on what your hiring volume is and sort of what positions you're hiring for. And, you know, I know like Tim Sackett, I've talked to him before about, you know, how can I improve the public sector recruiting life cycle to make it less onerous on people, because he works with public sector folks as well. So they exist, you know, it's a place, but we're not going to compete with a Lockheed Martin. We're just not. I mean, we don't hire enough people. We're 1,100 people. Our biggest challenge is hiring people for the summer season, and as load season's coming up and the snow starts to melt, and getting kind of those seasonal employees, that's probably one of our bigger challenges. So we don't do sourcers just because it's not really cost effective for us. And some of it too, to be honest, is the change in mindset. When you talk to a public sector or a utility or that, you're probably dealing with people who've been doing it the same way for a really, really long time. There's, like, if you look at old SOPs and you see how it was done, it was, we do this step now and then we do this, and a lot of times what you're doing is you're moving the piece of paper along in the process, and you're not really an owner of the process for some of those more traditional based ones. And my team's done a really good job of trying to change that, and some of it is changing the hiring manager's mindset too. It's like, guess what, we're actually experts, and sorry, we're going to insert ourselves in this process now and give you our opinion of, you know, you think you want this person, but they're not qualified, or had you looked at this person, you know, when I talked to them, I think they had some really good skills. And so it's really changing some of that mindset. That can be
Yeah,
a challenge.
totally. And I think this actually ties into that from Jess. He asked, what does upward mobility look like, and how do you explain that to candidates? And you and I touched on this the first time we talked too. Like, people don't leave.
Yeah, it's hard. So we, on the one hand, there's going to be opportunity in the next 3 to 5 years. Just like a lot of organizations, there's a lot of people who are going to be eligible to retire.
Right.
And we are still an organization that has a pension, so those people will take their retirement.
Absolutely. They can afford to
But,
retire.
you know, right. But they've also earned it. You know, they've been there for 30 years and put their time in and did a good job for the organization. So, but people don't leave. It's like I said, it's a stable organization. We're pretty flat, honestly, in terms of levels and everything like that. We even just went through a process by which we looked at our job levels and said, you know, we don't need 4, we need 2, you know, and so people used to equate upward mobility with I went from a 1 to a 2 to a 2 to a 3, and really that was just tenure based. So what we're really working on now is how do we get you career development across the different divisions, and how do we build skill sets that are going to put you in a better position should something open up, or if you see something in another division. Because if you're in one of the divisions, so let's say you're in operations, but you really want to get into engineering because you have a project management background, it can be hard to cross that once you've, whatever division you go into, sometimes it's hard to get out because now you're looked at as I'm in this. So what we work on and what we talk about with candidates is to say, we get you experience. You're gonna have time to build some skills. We have tuition reimbursement. You know, we're building out a really comprehensive training and development program so that you can have the skills to put your best foot forward. And we also offer on our team, we do mock interviews, we do resume reviews, we really do some career coaching so that people can maximize their opportunities when they come to them. But the other thing that we say is you need to own it. If you want to have a career and have upward mobility, you need to go out there and be aggressive about it. Our job is not to call you up and say, oh, hey, Tommy, I don't know if you knew this, but this position is going to come open and I know you really wanted it. I mean, we try if we know people have been asking us,
Naturally.
but it's on you. You gotta own it.
Yeah, totally. So I have a question. Everybody else is asking questions, so I'm trying not to. I'm just going to ask.
You can ask your question. Ask your question.
I get to decide. How do you explain that time to fill? Like, how do you explain to a candidate in a way that doesn't scare them that it's going to take 60 days to actually get in the seat?
Yeah, and honestly, just for those of you out there who are keeping score, we are one of the shortest time to fills in the public sector, particularly in Colorado. Yay, team, we did it. But some of it is around, because we count our time to fill starting with once my team gets the requisition. So that includes everything from working with the hiring manager to get the job posting figured out. We don't start it from the time the job's posted. We start it from when our team starts working on it. So ours is actually probably a little bit shorter.
Right.
But we put on our website, so if you were to go to denverwater.org careers, you're going to see, or is it jobs? I don't know. Just go to denverwater.org and click on the careers. When you go there, we explain our process. We have it, this is what's going to happen, and we try to make sure that people understand how long it's going to be posted. For all of our job postings, we put an opening date and a closing date. So most of our postings are a minimum of 2 weeks. But we also say, don't wait to apply because we reserve the right to close the posting if we have enough of applicants. So that piece is not as hard. The hardest piece is the after part. So depending on what the position is, there can be multiple rounds of interviews. Most of our entry-level ones, not so much. That's more of a traditional experience. But we have that initial alignment meeting with our hiring managers and talk through what that process is going to be like. It's not always set in stone. Sometimes they decide what it's going to be like when they see who they get, and that's okay. We can deal with that. But we try to talk to the candidates as much as we can. We try to keep them warm. We call them if something's going to get delayed, or we let them know what it's going to look like, so that they kind of understand. I think what's interesting, you know, having applied for jobs in the past and worked in private sector, I feel like we actually communicate with our candidates a little bit more. I mean, yes, a lot of it can be automated, but I was talking with a friend and we were joking about it. It's like, I just got a thanks, no thanks from like 4 years ago. It's
Wow.
just like, really? So, you know, we do try to let them know what's going on. And I mean, I don't think we're completely out of the loop, but we do, if we, especially if we know that it's a hard to fill job, we talk even more with those people.
I like that. Just so you just keep mentioning it, make sure they know what they're up
Hmm.
against. Um, so we actually have used up our time, but I want to ask one more question. I
Okay.
know, isn't that crazy? Um, so Mark Fogel wants to know what that artwork is behind you, and I know that you're an art
Oh,
collector, so I wanted to give you a chance to be like, so this is this piece.
yeah, so this is, I'm probably going to forget his last name, so I'm going to look on
Yeah.
here. Oh God, it's Sebastian. I'm going to forget. Gosh darn it. But it is a from Rolling Stones, and we're not huge Rolling Stones fans, but we're both music people, and we just Junger, is it Junger? Sebastian Junger? Oh, it's gonna kill me. But he does these amazing drawings and paintings, but they're usually like a caricature. But he always does Keith Richards because of how many, you know, wrinkles he has, and
Detail.
so.
Details.
So I will tweet. I will look up the name of the artist because I can't believe I'm forgetting it. It's Sebastian. I think it's Junger, but I'm probably wrong. He has amazing work. We love his work. We have another one on Robert Johnson, the blues guitarist. That's just fabulous. So
Awesome.
highly recommend.
Awesome. And where can
That's a
people
Peter
find you on
Max.
Twitter?
I'm sorry.
Your Twitter username is?
Oh,
I'm
it's M Faulkner 43. So it's really exciting. Sorry, there's a lot of Mary Faulkners in the world.
right. So go follow her. That's M Faulkner 43. And Mary, thank you so much. That time flies
Thank
when you're
you.
having fun, right?
I know, right? Thank you for
Seriously.
having
Yeah. And so for anybody who's still on the line, next week our guest is Jeff Newman. He's a sourcing specialist over at Dropbox, and he's going to talk about writing hyper personalized emails.
me.
Steve Levy
Nice.
calls it the Newman-esque approach. So that's special, right? When Levy makes a verb out of you, that's something. All right. So we will see all of you next week, same time, same place. And again, Mary, thank you so much.
Thank
All right,
you.
everybody. We'll see you next week.